Close your eyes for a moment. Try to remember the exact sound of a heavy copper whistling kettle coming to a boil, or the deep, rich smell of raw coffee beans being crushed in a wooden wall grinder. Today, I want to take you on a gentle journey back in time, back to the Netherlands of the 1960s, 70s and 80s. We are going to dust off 20 forgotten everyday objects that used to be the beating heart of our homes. These are not just things, they are the anchors of our childhood memories, silent witnesses to a simpler, perhaps warmer time. We will remember the textures, the sounds, and the unique rituals that defined our days. And as we wander through this house of memories, wait until we reach the very last item, a small but powerful symbol of true Dutch coziness that will instantly transport you back to sitting at your grandmother's table on a Sunday afternoon. Before we look at these objects, let us remember how time used to feel back then. The days seemed to flow at a much slower, more forgiving pace. We did not have the constant, frantic rush of instant messages or endless digital entertainment. Instead, we had the quiet joy of anticipation, waiting for the milkman, waiting for the weekly reading portfolio, or waiting for a photograph to be developed was not a burden, it was a beautiful ritual. There is a modern myth that because we lacked today's advanced technology, our lives were somehow poorer or less connected. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Without screens to distract us, we actually looked at each other. We listened more closely. Our hands were busy with physical, meaningful tasks that grounded us in reality. Every object we touched had weight, texture, and a specific purpose that required our physical involvement. Life back then was incredibly rich in sincerity, bound together by genuine human connections and the comforting rhythms of domestic life. A simple evening at home felt full and complete because we were truly present with the people around us. Let us begin with a wonderfully pragmatic invention that perfectly captures the spirit of our Dutch households in the 1960s and 70s. The flessenlicker, or bottle scraper, was an absolute necessity in every single kitchen. Picture that long, thin metal wire ending in a flexible, half-moon-shaped rubber or silicone head. Do you remember the distinct, scraping sound it made as you pushed it down into a tall glass bottle of vanilla vla or plain yogurt? In those days, we knew the value of things, and wasting food was simply unthinkable. You would angle the scraper just right, twisting the wire handle so the rubber edge hugged the inside of the glass perfectly. It took patience and a bit of skill to pull up that very last, delicious dollop of sweet vla that was hiding at the bottom. The satisfaction of a completely empty, scraped clean bottle standing on the counter was a small but genuine triumph. It taught us to respect what we had, to be resourceful and to appreciate every single drop. The flessenlicker was not just a kitchen tool. It was a symbol of the careful, mindful way our mothers and grandmothers ran their homes, ensuring nothing was ever taken for granted. Moving into the living room, your hands might brush against something incredibly thick, soft, and richly patterned. The heavy Persian table carpet draped majestically over the center of the wooden dining or coffee table. Do you recall the deep burgundy reds, the intricate dark blue woven patterns, and the thick fuzzy texture under your fingertips? It was entirely normal to have a carpet on the table rather than on the floor. It added a layer of undeniable warmth and coziness to the room, absorbing the sounds of clinking teacups and the low hum of family conversations. If you close your eyes, you can almost smell the unique aroma trapped in its fibers, a nostalgic blend of old cigar smoke, spilled coffee, and the subtle scent of floor wax from the surrounding room. Whenever crumbs fell, you would carefully sweep them into your hand, being careful not to rub them into the wool. We would rest our elbows on it while reading the evening newspaper or playing a game. That heavy piece of fabric was the anchor of the living room, the center around which our quiet evenings revolved, offering a tactile comfort that modern glass or bare wood tables completely lack. Now, take a deep breath and imagine the kitchen in the early morning light. Hanging proudly on the wall was the manual coffee grinder, very often the classic wooden and ceramic model by Dove Egberts. This was not a machine you simply plugged in. It required your physical energy to start the day. Do you remember the smooth feel of the wooden handle and the rhythmic grinding noise as you turned the crank? You would pour the dark, roasted beans into the ceramic hopper at the top, and with every rotation, the kitchen would slowly fill with the most intoxicating, rich aroma of fresh coffee. The crushed coffee fell into a small glass ketch cup at the bottom. Making coffee back then was a deliberate, mindful ritual. The sound of those beans cracking was the official alarm clock for the entire house, signaling that a new day had begun. We did not rush through our mornings with paper cups to go. We took the time to grind the beans, brew the coffee, and sit down together at the table. That sturdy wall grinder was a symbol of hospitality and the beautiful, unhurried rhythm of morning life in the 1960s and 70s. Do you remember how truly cold the winters used to be before natural gas central heating became common in every home? Standing tall next to the stove was the heavy, black iron or polished copper coal scuttle. Bringing in the coal was a daily chore that defined the winter months. You can still hear the loud, clattering roar as the dark, dusty lumps of coal were poured from the scuttle directly into the glowing belly of the stove. It smelled faintly of sulfur and deep earth. Managing the fire was a true art form. You had to know exactly when to add more fuel and how to adjust the drafts to keep the living room warm throughout the long, dark evenings. The heat it radiated was intense and localized. Your front would be roasting while your back remained slightly chilled. We would all gather tightly around that stove, pulling our chairs as close as possible, sharing stories or listening to the radio. The coal scuttle was heavy and dirty, but it was the vital vessel that carried warmth and life into our homes, reminding us of the physical effort required to keep the family comfortable during those freezing Dutch winters. Every single week, there was a quiet knock at the door, bringing a moment of pure excitement for everyone in the family. It was the delivery of the reading portfolio. Wrapped in a sturdy brown paper cover, with a large paper sticker on the front, this thick stack of magazines traveled from house to house throughout the neighborhood. Do you remember smelling the fresh ink of the pages? There was a strict hierarchy based on how much you were willing to pay. If you paid more, you received the newest editions of Libelle, Marguerite and Panorama first. If you paid less, you happily waited a few weeks for the older copies. We would eagerly flip through the pages, reading the serial stories, looking at the fashion patterns, and laughing at the comic strips. Sometimes you would find a faint pencil mark or a folded corner left by a neighbor who had read it before you. It was a shared communal experience, a way of connecting with the street without even speaking. When the week was over, you carefully placed the magazines back into the brown folder, ready to be collected and passed on to the next eager household down the street. On top of the stove, reigning supreme over the kitchen, sat the shiny metal whistling kettle. Long before the invention of electric water boilers, heating water was a process that demanded your attention. You would fill the heavy kettle from the cold tap, place it on the gas burner, and then wait. As the water grew hotter, a soft, low hiss would begin to build inside the metal chamber. Do you remember the anticipation? That low hiss would slowly escalate into a high-pitched, urgent shriek that echoed through the entire house. It was a sound that commanded immediate action. You had to rush into the kitchen, grab a woven pot holder to protect your hand from the burning metal handle, and quickly switch off the gas. The sudden silence that followed was always the relief. As you poured the boiling water into a teapot, thick clouds of warm steam would fog up the kitchen windows, instantly making the room feel cozy and secure. The whistling kettle was the loud, proud herald of tea time, bringing everyone together for a quiet moment of reflection in the middle of a busy afternoon. In the hallway, usually sitting on a small wooden table, was our connection to the outside world. The classic grey rotary phone, often the sturdy model provided by the National Postal Service. It was heavy, made of thick, durable plastic with a receiver that felt substantial in your hand. Making a call was a physical act. You had to carefully place your finger in the circular hole for each digit, pull the dial all the way around to the metal finger stop, and let it go. Do you remember the incredibly satisfying, rhythmic ticking sound as the dial spun back into place? You had to wait patiently for each number to register. If you made a mistake on the very last digit, you had to hang up and start the entire process all over again. The cord was wonderfully long and curly, inevitably getting tangled into knots as you paced around the hallway during a long conversation with a friend. We memorized the phone numbers of all our loved ones, etching them into our minds. Because the phone was anchored to the wall, talking was an exclusive activity. You stood there, gave the caller your full attention, and truly listened. When the canals finally froze solid and the winter air turned biting cold, out came the wooden Frisian ice skates from the back of the shed. They smelled wonderfully of oiled leather straps, dry wood, and cold steel. Getting them on was a ritual in itself. You sat on the freezing bank of a ditch or canal, your fingers turning numb as you struggled to tightly bind the thick leather straps over your everyday shoes. They had to be painfully tight to offer any support. Do you remember the first wobbly steps onto the black ice? The long steel blades made a beautiful, deep scraping sound as they cut through the frozen surface. Whole neighborhoods would turn out on the ice, gliding together in the crisp winter sunshine. You could see your breath in the air, and your cheeks would flush bright red from the freezing wind. We skated for miles, passing windmills and snow-covered fields, feeling a profound sense of freedom. Coming home with frozen toast to a steaming cup of hot chocolate or warm pea soup was the perfect reward. Those wooden skates were our wings, carrying us through the magical Dutch winters of our youth. Deep inside the drawer, or sitting proudly on a shelf in the garage, there was always a wooden cigar box. Perhaps it was a beautiful cedar wood box from Hagenius or Agio, originally bought by a grandfather. But in our hands, it had been repurposed into a treasure chest. When you opened the lid, a faint, lingering aroma of dry tobacco leaves and aged wood would immediately greet you. Inside, there was a colorful, chaotic collection of household necessities. For some, it was completely filled with spare buttons of every imaginable size, shape and color. For others, it held shiny marbles, foreign coins, screws, or small sewing supplies. Running your fingers through that cool, clicking sea of buttons was strangely soothing. Whenever a button fell off a winter coat, your mother would bring out the cigar box, tipping its contents onto the kitchen table to hunt for a perfect match. It was a beautiful example of our deep-rooted thriftiness. Nothing was ever thrown away. Everything had a potential future use, carefully preserved inside a beautifully crafted wooden box that smelled of cozy Sunday afternoons and grandfather's smoke. Spring cleaning was not just a personal chore. It was a loud, rhythmic neighborhood event. The key tool for this seasonal transformation was the rattan carpet beater. It was a large, woven pedal on a long handle, surprisingly lightweight but incredibly sturdy. Once a week, and especially during the first sunny days of spring, the heavy woolen rugs were dragged outside and hung over a sturdy clothesline in the backyard or across a balcony railing. Do you remember the sharp, echoing thwack as the rattan hit the thick wool? The sound would bounce off the brick houses, joined by the identical sounds of neighbors doing exactly the same thing. You could literally see the dust flying into the air, dancing brightly in the morning sunlight. It required real physical strength and rhythm to beat a rug properly. Afterward, the rugs were brought back inside, and they smelled remarkably fresh, holding the scent of the outdoor breeze and honest hard work. The carpet beater was a symbol of a time when maintaining a home was a vigorous physical endeavor, creating a living space that felt truly, deeply clean. At the kitchen table, underneath the warm glow of the hanging lamp, we engage in a meticulous financial ritual. Saving stamp booklets were a staple of everyday life. Whether from Albert Heijn, the Spar, or directly from the local milkman, collecting these tiny paper stamps was serious business. Do you remember the sharp, slightly bitter taste of the glue as you licked the back of each stamp? You had to carefully press them into the designated squares in the little paper booklet, making sure they aligned perfectly. It was a wonderful task for children, helping our mothers fill page after page. We watched the booklets grow thicker and heavier over the weeks. It was a tangible form of saving, a physical representation of patience and loyalty. When a booklet was finally full, the sense of accomplishment was immense. You would proudly take it to the store to trade it in for something special, perhaps a new set of towels, a glass bowl, or a folding camping chair. It taught us that small, consistent efforts eventually lead to a rewarding prize, a beautiful lesson in delayed gratification. Before the sun even fully rose, the quiet streets were filled with a gentle, melodic clinking sound. It was the local milkman, navigating his cart from door to door. We never had to worry about running out of dairy because the glass milk bottles were delivered directly to our doorsteps. Do you remember the heavy feel of those cold glass bottles covered with a thin layer of morning condensation? The absolute best part was the brightly colored foil cap sitting on top. To open it, you simply pressed your thumb right through the center of the foil, feeling it tear with a soft pop. In the winter, if it was cold enough, the cream would freeze and push the foil cap straight up into the air like a little silver hat. We would fight over who got to drink that rich, thick cream resting at the very top of the bottle. When the bottles were empty, we rinsed them out and placed them dutifully back on the doorstep, ready to be collected, washed, and reused. It was a perfect, sustainable circle of trust between the neighborhood and the friendly man who knew exactly what every family needed. And then there was the moment of ultimate coziness, the sacred Dutch coffee time. At the center of this ritual sat the beautifully decorated metal biscuit tin. It was usually painted with traditional landscapes, windmills, or floral patterns. When the coffee was poured, the tin was brought to the table. Do you remember the distinct, slightly metallic sound of the tight lid being pried open? The moment the seal was broken, the sweet, buttery aroma of speculoos, stroopwafels, or shortbread filled the air. But there was a strict, unspoken rule in our culture. The tin was passed around, and you were allowed to take exactly one biscuit. Just one. Once everyone had chosen their single treat, the lid went firmly back onto the tin with a decisive snap, sealing the remaining cookies away. It was not out of stinginess, but out of a deep respect for moderation and appreciation. That single biscuit was savored slowly with the hot coffee. The biscuit tin was the centerpiece of family conversations, a beautiful tradition that taught us to enjoy the simple pleasures of life without excess. Laundry day was a physically demanding affair that involved an incredibly loud, energetic machine known as the spin dryer. Usually placed in the corner of the bathroom or the kitchen, this heavy metal cylinder was essential for getting the water out of our heavy cotton clothes. After washing, you would carefully load the dripping wet garments into the drum, making sure it was perfectly balanced. If it was not balanced, you knew immediately. As soon as you flipped the switch and pressed down on the heavy lid, the machine would roar to life. Do you remember how violently it shook and rumbled? It felt like the machine was trying to hop across the floor. You often had to stand beside it, resting a hand on top to keep it steady. A thick stream of soapy water would shoot out from the spout at the bottom directly into a plastic bucket. When it finally spun down to a halt, the clothes were plastered tightly against the inner walls, cold, damp, but smelling wonderfully clean. It was a noisy, dramatic appliance, but pulling out that freshly spun laundry felt like a very satisfying victory. Bedrooms back then were certainly not the heated sanctuaries they are today. With only single-pane glass in the windows, waking up to beautiful, intricate ice flowers completely covering the inside of the glass was a common occurrence. To survive the freezing nights, we relied on the metal hot water bottle. Do you remember the heavy, ribbed texture of the copper or aluminum cylinder? Every evening, your mother would boil water on the stove and carefully pour it into the narrow opening, securely tightening the metal stopper. To prevent it from burning our skin, it was wrapped in a thick towel or a specially knitted woolen cover. Slipping into an ice-cold bed was a shock, but your feet would immediately seek out that heavy, radiating source of heat hidden under the heavy woolen blankets. The warmth it provided was deep and immensely comforting, slowly thawing your frozen toes as you drifted off to sleep. In the morning, the water inside would be lukewarm, but its job was done. That simple metal bottle was the ultimate symbol of maternal care on a harsh winter night. When the autumn rain lashed violently against the windows and the skies turned a dark, moody gray, there was only one proper cure. Hot cocoa, made from the iconic Droste cocoa tin. That square, red metal box held a fascinating secret that captivated us as children. It featured an illustration of a nurse holding a tray, and on that tray was a cup and the exact same tin of cocoa. On that smaller tin, she appeared again, holding an even smaller tin. Do you remember staring closely at the box, trying to see how deep the endless picture went? We even named the optical illusion the Droste effect. But the real magic was inside. You had to pry off the tight metal lid with the back of a spoon. Inside was the rich, dark, earthy-smelling raw cocoa powder. Making a cup meant mixing a spoonful of powder with a little sugar and a splash of cold milk to create a thick, dark paste, before slowly stirring in boiling hot milk. The taste was intense, slightly bitter, and wonderfully genuine. Wrapping your cold hands around that steaming mug was the definition of absolute safety and warmth. Reach deep into your pockets and try to remember the substantial weight of real money. Before the lightweight digital cards and the modern euro, we carried beautifully crafted silver coins. I'm talking about the classic Dutch guilders and the heavy, impressive Rijksdaalder. Do you remember the raised profile of Queen Juliana and later Queen Beatrix struck directly into the metal? These coins had real, tactile substance. They clinged heavily against each other in your leather purse. Slapping a solid silver Rijksdaalder down on the wooden counter at the local bakery or butcher produced a loud, authoritative sound that commanded respect. You knew exactly how much purchasing power you held just by feeling the weight in your hand. A single Rijksdaalder could buy a bag of groceries, a round of coffees, or a generous handful of sweets at the corner shop. We learned the value of a hard-earned guilder because we could literally feel it. Holding those old coins today instantly brings back a sense of stability, a time when the world moved slower and a guilder was truly worth a guilder. When family came over for a visit, or after a particularly memorable summer vacation to France or Spain, the evening entertainment was a sacred event. The living room lights were turned off and the heavy slide projector was placed on the table. Do you remember the low, steady hum of the cooling fan and the distinct, warm smell of the powerful projector lamp heating up the dust in the air? We would sit in the dark, watching a glowing square of light on a portable white screen. The mechanism had a very satisfying, mechanical click-clack sound as each new photographic slide was forcefully pushed into the light beam. Sometimes a slide would get stuck, or someone would put one in upside down, causing the entire room to erupt in gentle laughter. We sat together, sharing stories, commenting on faded colors and funny outfits. It was not like quickly scrolling through hundreds of digital photos on a small phone. We looked at each picture for a long time, truly appreciating the frozen moment. The slide projector forced us to pause, to look, and to remember our shared history together. Before glowing screens demanded our constant attention, Sunday afternoons were reserved for family board games, and none was more beloved than the game of the goose. Do you remember unfolding the old, slightly frayed cardboard board on the table? It smelled faintly of aged paper and old ink. The colorful spiral track was filled with beautifully illustrated geese and dangerous traps. We played with beautifully worn wooden dice, shaking them loudly in our cupped hands before letting them roll across the board. The anticipation was incredibly high. Landing on the bridge meant moving forward, but everyone secretly feared landing in the dreaded well or the dark prison, which meant you had to sit and wait until another player came to rescue you. The room would be filled with groans of frustration and loud cheers of victory. There were no flashing lights or electronic sounds, just the simple joy of moving wooden pieces around the board. The game of the goose taught us about luck, patience, and how to lose gracefully, creating bonds of laughter that resonated deeply through the entire house. Finally, let us think about the rhythmic, comforting sounds of a tidy, well-kept house. Long before the heavy, roaring electric vacuum cleaners became common, there was the manual carpet sweeper. It was a flat, heavy metal box with a long wooden handle attached to a hinge in the middle. Inside the box were stiff, rotating brushes. Do you remember the squeak and rumble it made as your mother pushed it back and forth over the Persian rugs or the living room carpet? It did not require a power cord or a plug. It simply ran on honest physical effort. The brushes would rapidly spin, sweeping up dust, crumbs, and pet hair into two small metal trays located on either side of the device. Emptying those trays over the garbage bin was always surprisingly satisfying. The sweeper left behind a faint smell of floor wax and unsettled dust. Pushing the sweeper was a quiet, almost meditative chore. It is a profound reminder that maintaining a beautiful cozy home in the 1960s and 70s was a physical act of love, achieved through simple mechanics and dedicated daily care. As we close this door to the past, we realize something important. When we look back at these 20 objects, we are not just longing for old metal, wood or glass. We do not just miss the heavy coffee grinder, the whistling kettle or the silver coins. What we truly miss is the irreplaceable feeling of that era. We long for our youth, for the comforting, steady presence of our parents and grandparents, and for a time when the world felt a little smaller, a little safer, and infinitely more personal. These objects were simply the faithful tools we used to build a life filled with genuine connection and simple, profound joys. If this gentle journey back in time brought a warm smile to your face, please gently press the like button and subscribe to our channel for more nostalgic memories. And now, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Which of these Dutch items made you feel the most nostalgic? Or is there another treasured object from your childhood that you wish you still had? Please take a moment to write your personal story in the comments below.